Thank you very much. I will be very brief. I would like to hear the first experience from OSCE mission as everybody else in this room, and I will make the time room for this. And in reality, when I was coming here, I had in mind the set of ideas which I was about to tell you just in brief. But then I realized that my ideas, although they are quite critical and they are not very much different from what you just mentioned. Just for the matter of clarity, I'm not ambassador anymore. 2 days ago, the decision was taken by President to release me from my duties. I will be back in Kiev quite soon, so I will allow myself to speak not that diplomatically after all, which might spark a bit of I understand there was a long day already. I would love to be here to hear from the very morning, but I traded it for also a very exciting event we had on the Parliament Hill, the CUPP, the Canadian-Ukraine Parliamentary Program. Interns were introducing the Canadian political leaders to what Ukraine is and what's going on in Ukraine. It's a very important, very interesting event. You should have seen the members of parliament coming to tell and praise the interns working for them and listening to what's going on in their homeland and sympathizing and telling how they can be resolved and what Canada can do to help the situation to be resolved. So in just a couple of words, what I'm trying to tell right now, that I should probably be moderate and praise the efforts of my colleagues from different foreign affairs, different foreign services and international organizations as OSCE, UN, NATO, different bodies which were trying to extend their hand to resolve the situation in Ukraine. And I should probably praise my own Ministry of Foreign Affairs and diplomats of the Embassy of Ukraine in Canada for doing this job and trying to resolve. At the same time, I have to be clear. What I believe that diplomacy has failed so far in resolving this crisis. And my argument is not just failed, it has the good reason, if it could be good reason, for failure. What we see and what we observe right now, whether we agree, all of us in this room or not, that the conditions are not there yet to diplomacy to go in full throttle and bring some changes we need so far. What I mean that the conditions are not there, I believe that for the conditions for the diplomacy to start working, we have to create things. Either it will be the bilateral mutual understanding and desire to work and find something middle ground for the negotiations, and then both sides or three sides will make their concessions and come to something. That's what we classically call diplomacy, when everybody understands that there are some limits of negotiations, but we are flexible and can sacrifice something for the sake of something greater. The only problem is that sometimes sides do not see it necessary to involve such a flexible mechanism as diplomacy if they see that there are other mechanisms, other instruments at hand, such as military force, for example. Just to give you an example of what I mean, we can bring the recent examples of recent negotiations in European lands. You know that there are words recently mentioned by former Minister Bildt when he mentioned that the borders in Europe were drawn in blood, and if we try to rewrite them, that's the only instrument we have, the blood, to rewrite them. More or less, what he's saying that the borders are sacred, and we can't just start opening this can of worms, because all the worms will get out, and we won't be able to, and even mentioning such an argument like something is ours, it's very tricky business in Europe. For most Canadians, 300 years is considerable term. For European nations, for most of the European nations, it's just very small stretch of the time. And if you go back deep in history, claiming your own land, believe me, that's the way to nowhere. So just to give you an example of what happened when, if you remember, Daytona negotiations and difference between what Mr. Milosevic agreed on and what is going on right now in Ukraine. Are we reaching anything with Minsk, Milan, or any other negotiations we had? Are we going anywhere? Do we have any fruits so far? I want to remind you that at the negotiations With Mr. Milosevic, there were a couple of crucial moments. And I'm not comparing immediately Milosevic and Putin. There are different actors and a different place they're holding in the whole situation. But the regime itself is very close to each to other. Mr. Putin, as popular as Mr. Milosevic, he had this idea of, renewal of the bigger state, and he was calling upon his own nationals to remind them the greatness of their own state and how it can enrich the neighboring tribes which are not on the great level of his own nation, and so forth and so on. If you remember what brought the diplomacy into scene, what let diplomacy play, there were a set of some actions. First of all, sanctions. Then even military sanctions. There were the mechanisms which brought Mr. Milosevic to this table of negotiations and allowed diplomats to start rolling their sleeves and working. If you look at what's happening right now in Ukrainian territory of Lugansk and Donetsk, we had this agreement that we will have the elections. Believe me, this idea is not very easy for Ukrainians, and it was criticized by at least half of population, the idea of having peace in Ukraine when so many of our soldiers dying even today. We lost today almost 10 soldiers and a couple of them wounded. So it's not very popular, but President had to do it. At the time in Yugoslavia, when the negotiations were in force, there were sanctions and positive incentives as well. So far, if I'm leaving this argument with you, we achieved nothing. We didn't have elections. Luhansk and Donetsk will have their own elections on 2nd of November. So we failed to have somebody to whom we'll be able to speak to. The peace, if regime is followed and respected, we will know in a couple of minutes. I would allow myself to say that it's not to the full extent as we hope. And what we see, the political positions of sides are not getting closer. On this one, let me leave it here with you, and if we have some minutes for the questions, I will be happy to do it.
Thank you very much, Ambassador.